this thing on? I'm a professional. No, I'm not. Alright, so welcome back to Dark with Sparkles. So today I'm going to be telling you about my deconstruction story. And I'm going to do that in the most organized way possible, or the most disorganized way possible. I guess we'll see how it goes.
Squirrel!
So I grew up in the Church of Christ, which is a fundamentalist Christian sect, not to be confused with the United Church of Christ, which is a totally different, more liberal group. So I guess when I was little, I went to church with my grandmother because my parents didn't really go to church at that point. And my mom started going religiously, pun intended, maybe when I was around 10 years old. And so it's a very fire and brimstone denomination of Christianity where a lot of the sermons are focused on the theme of you're broken, you're terrible, the only way to save you is through Jesus, and otherwise you're gonna burn in hell for all eternity. Which is a fun, happy-go-lucky message when you're a kid, just totally lighthearted and lovely.
I didn't sign up for this shit.
Anyway, so also thought crime is a punishable offense. So even if you think about things that are considered sinful, that's the same as actually committing them. So this started me down a form of religious OCD, also known as scrupulosity, where I became obsessed with morality and doing the right thing all of the time. I would constantly pray. I mean, really, sometimes every few minutes for a really long time. Just that God would forgive my sins, just in case. If I, were to die at any moment, I wouldn't be sent to hell. So along those lines, my house growing up was also next to a highway, and I would hear semi trucks often going, back and forth down this highway all the time. But sometimes it would be in the middle of the night, so it would wake me up in a dead sleep, and I would hear the loud noise, and I would jump up really quick. My heart would be racing, and I would just pray really quick just to make sure I was covered before I went back to sleep, just in case, it was Jesus coming, it was the trumpet sounding. So, as you can imagine, my childhood was riddled with a lot of anxiety because of those things. Also, as a woman, there were certain expectations placed on me to be the keeper of male purity, to be supportive of my husband, to be the caregiver and the caretaker and do all the things for everybody all the time, which also is not exclusive to religion, but anyway, I digress. I had to be careful what I wore, what I said. Women weren't allowed to speak over men, no women preachers, etc., etc. Last but certainly not least, I was also taught things that weren't scientifically sound as being fact. And by that I mean you start with a conclusion because the Bible is the inerrant word of God. And so that's your conclusion because everyone pretty much says it's true. The people that you trust tell you that it's infallible. And so you start with this as the conclusion and you work backwards and you try to fit reality into that worldview, which is the exact opposite of the scientific method, right? So using the scientific method, you start with a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, and you end with a conclusion, or at least a discussion. So, small tangent, I think the scientific method is one of the greatest things that we as humans have come up with, and we so often take it for granted. I'm going to dedicate an entire video to talk about that, but I digress again. Anyway, so starting with the conclusion first led to teachings like dinosaurs living at the same time as people because they were on the ark with Noah, which, if you don't know, the ark was built in Kentucky as like a museum that's, supposedly historically accurate. Yeah, those are my roots. Those are my people. Also, things like the earth is only 6,000 years old because that's how the genealogy of Jesus goes in the Bible. So, things like that. It put me significantly behind scientifically. So, I began getting out of some of those bad ideas when I went to college back in 2010 because I'm old. I got a sound foundation in science. So I started my undergraduate degree studying marine science, which required me to take all the base science courses, chemistry, biology, physics, all these things, and I learned about evolution and how exactly that works. I'd always been taught that people were completely distinct, being created in the image of God, and so in line with that, evolution, they said was completely made up. The saying I often heard was, we didn't come from monkeys, and that's definitely not how evolution works, and maybe I'll do a video on that at some point too, but I know there are a lot of great content creators out there who are biologists covering those kinds of topics. So all that to say, I started learning science, how science works, the scientific method, process. That's my dog. Sydney. Okay, we're back. I learned the scientific process, and things started to conflict with those religious beliefs. So as I learned those things, and that's when sparks kind of started to fly for my deconstruction. I would say, I began to realize I couldn't reconcile the beliefs I had held for so long with the scientific knowledge that made sense of how the world actually operates. But I did wrestle with it, with those conflicting ideas for years. Cognitive dissonance really set in hard. If you aren't familiar with the term, it's when you're trying to hold two conflicting beliefs. But because those beliefs can't reconcile with each other, it becomes very stressful and uncomfortable. So people, including myself, often start to put religion in a box. And basically, I just used a different set of rules for religion than I did for everything else. So, religion was supernatural, and so natural rules need not apply. So, all through my undergrad, 5 years of it, while I was earning my 2 undergraduate degrees in marine science and applied mathematics, so through 2015, I was compartmentalizing a lot. I had started going to a liberal church, although more liberal to me meant there was music in church. It was, still very conservative, but we had instruments, which was huge for me because I've always loved music. So I could kind of be religious over here and then scientific minded over here, and never should those ideas, cross. I just kind of enjoyed that cognitive dissonance for a while, although I didn't know that term at the time. So the reconciliation of those conflicting ideas didn't really come until I went to graduate school. And I've always been a deep thinker, and I think things through probably more than I should. But I started digging into my faith, into the deep philosophical questions as I went into graduate school, as I was simultaneously digging deep into, mathematics. I was getting a graduate degree in biostatistics. So I was learning the foundations of mathematics and how, calculus is the basis for statistics, and learning all the theory behind that. So I kind of used that same thinking and moved it into my religion at that point. So it's all right, where did all this come from? What was the basis of all this? So 2015 to 2017, I moved states for school, and I, luckily, I say now, never settled into a church there. School took up so much of my time, and we tried out a few different places, but nothing really stuck. So not having that constant Sunday reinforcement, I think, gave me more space for those questions. But I also went into it wanting to be closer to God. My whole life up to this point, I never felt like I was doing enough. I was never good enough. I was broken after all. And so I was like, I'm going to learn as much as I can and be the best Christian I can be. I may not have a church family right now, but I'm gonna get the closest to God that I've ever been, and I'm gonna dig into this Bible more than I ever have, and so I did that. The problem was I just got more questions than I got answers, and of course, because I was raised in the religion, I often had that voice that comes up every time saying, "Oh, well, this question came up, but don't doubt. It's fine. You just need to have faith." And the more that went on, I also had the fear of hell coming up, because now, as I'm reasoning through things, I'm saying, none of this really makes sense, but what if it's true? I'm having all these doubts, but what if I stop believing this and then I get sent to the fiery depths of hell? And so that fear of hell kept me in for several more years. I had basically intellectually stopped believing, but the doubt, the possibility of the damnation had me grasping at the straws of my religion. That, and I maybe knew 2 people who weren't Christians openly. So my entire community and family was all based around it. So understandably, the idea of letting it go was really, really scary. So I think my move into agnosticism happened when I was able to let go of hell. And when you take the time to think about hell critically, hell is not just. No just and good being would punish anyone for all of eternity based on a very small period of time on Earth, where the rules are, let's face it, convoluted at best, right? Especially a divine being claiming to be all about love. Yeah, it's not a just thing. It's not a just idea. And so once I came to terms with that and could let hell go, all of the dominoes just started to fall. Because once I let go of that fear, there was no reason to believe any of it anymore. And at that point, when the dominoes fell, that was 2020. And I had labeled myself an agnostic, which, was a really great time, 2020, to change your entire worldview and also deal with a global pandemic and also go through postpartum depression, as I had just had my child right before that all happened. So yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot. All at once. Do not recommend. 10 out of 10. Do not recommend. Anyway, so letting go of hell, though, letting go of at least the Christian God, was such a relief. But in that relief was also some panic. What was I going to do now? Literally almost everyone I knew believed this stuff. And that's when I really rolled into investigating secular resources. Up to this point, it really had just been me reading the Bible, investigating contradictions, and also looking up resources from Christian people to try to validate myself. I hadn't looked into anything by anyone who believed differently than me, and I didn't even know the whole secular community existed, which sounds really crazy because now it is quite widespread and ever-growing community, thankfully. But the church can be very isolating. And coming out of these ideas, I felt very alone. I felt like I was the only one having these thoughts, and everyone else was just having a great relationship with God, the whole time, and I'm just missing something. Everybody else is like, yeah, let's go, Jesus. And I was either doing something wrong or just completely missing something. And so I started finding content, books, podcasts. Did I say podcasts? I think that'd be a whole different thing. Podcasts, books, podcasts, YouTube videos from people who were critically analyzing religious beliefs. And boy, did I go down the rabbit hole. They discuss things like argument fallacies, conflicting texts in the Bible, other religions, etc. It was so eye-opening, and it helped me feel more confident in the conclusions that I kind of already reached on my own, and made me feel like I wasn't crazy. I had just been in an echo chamber for a very long time. So I broke it. You can totally tell I've done this before, right? And so as I came out of religion fully, I started to remember things that had come up through my childhood and young adult years that I'd suppressed or just put in a box. Like, don't worry about that. Just have faith, that's not important kind of stuff. So the earliest question I can remember thinking related to religion was probably when I was maybe 7 or 8. And I watched the Disney movie Hercules, which is one of my absolute favorite movies, still to this day, actually. And in that movie, the Muses, who are documenting what's happening to Hercules in this movie, and they sing a song at the beginning, and in that song, they say the story that they're telling is the gospel truth. They say the phrase, that's the gospel truth. And I remember thinking, well, that doesn't make sense, because this is supposed to be fantasy. Like, this isn't supposed to be real. And gospel truth is what they talk about at church. That's gospel, that's Jesus. But they're saying that this is gospel truth. And that's so silly. And so that kind of blew my mind. Of course, I was little, so, I went on to the next thing pretty quickly. But that's the first memory I have of questioning and noting that there could be other people who believed different things out there in the world. And I had a somewhat similar experience in high school with the phrase Bible belts, which is a very, common phrase. But I had never heard it. I'd never heard the term, and a friend of mine had just mentioned it in passing, casual conversation, and I had to go look it up because I had no idea what it was. And when I did, I was like, wow, so not everybody believes this everywhere? That's so weird. And it makes me sad that, as a teenager, I still knew so little about the world outside of my small town. And I'd been raised so narrowly that I just thought everyone in the world was a Christian, I guess. I didn't have access outside of my community. Just in that vein, I had several other times over the years where I would just be starting to doubt, maybe, or a question would come up and I would just start crying out to God to just make himself known to me when I would have those, those weak moments. So all these things that make sense, and I felt overwhelmed, and I just needed him to show me that he was there, and I never got an answer. And I realized this after coming out the other side, because I would never hear God's voice, but I would find a way to turn some coincidence into guidance from God. So things like opening my Bible to a specific verse or a song that I would hear come on the radio. And the truth is, I have those coincidental moments all the time now as a non-believer. I'll be thinking about something and then see something related to it on TV, or someone will mention something about it. And, before I would have attributed it to God, and now I contribute it to human pattern recognition abilities But I digress once again. So, after labeling myself agnostic in 2020, I moved into the label of agnostic atheist. Probably about a year later, which I still consider myself to be today. I don't think that God is something that we can know if it exists or not, at least not right now, but I don't believe in any known gods. However, although I do associate myself with that label, I do prefer to refer to myself as a secular humanist, defining myself by the things I do believe in instead of the things that I don't. So I believe in humans, I believe in good. And I honestly feel free. I'm free of the burden of hell, free of Big Brother in the sky watching my every move, free of unmeetable expectations. On the flip side of all those great things, I have also had a lot of anger to work through. And not anger at people, but anger at the system that told me all of these things were true, leaving no room for critical thought. And it's taken me years to work through that anger as well. So I finally feel in a place to share my story publicly, which is why I'm here. I think it's really important for people to share their stories like this when they feel able, and if they're in a safe space that they can, because it's very common. So my life is far from perfect, but it's full of joy and peace after shedding my religious shackles. So I just want to say, if you're out there and you're questioning, you're confused, you don't know what to believe anymore, if you're out of religion but you're angry, you're not alone. You're absolutely not alone. I've been there. Lots of others have been there too. Know that your feelings are valid and you're not alone. And thank you for being here and listening to my story. And I'm just gonna leave you with one last thing. It can be dark out there. Life can be dark. But don't forget to sparkle. Thanks, everybody.